Hi, and welcome to the Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Tim Longo, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, a man who can't wait to get back into those ducts.
Brett Duville. That's right, man. I want to get my ducks in a row.
You get your ducts in a row.
I got my tape right here.
There's nothing like becoming a world-famous super spy and then crawling around in a bunch of ventilation ducts for many minutes at a time.
It's somewhat expected. It's also very diehard.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there you go. So we are, of course, talking about the first episode in our series on Metal Gear Solid #1. One of my favorites, as I've talked about a lot on the podcast, being a big fan of the Metal Gear, with some caveats that I want to talk about this time for sure, but self-admitted that, all of my phone sounds, audio, or Metal Gear sounds, my ringtone and my text tone and my alerts and everything, all Metal Gear. So it's funny to play a Metal Gear game because I just break out in cold sweats because I feel like my phone's ringing the whole time. So Metal Gear. Kojima.
Not the first in the series, though, right? This is the first on the PlayStation. I guess there were...
Yeah, no, this is definitely... Yeah, this is the first Metal Gear Solid game with the Solid right?
Okay.
Metal Gear 1, Metal Gear came out on the NES, and there were actually two different versions for those who probably know if they're listening, but those who don't know, there was the Famicom version that was in Japan, and then they kind of did a remake that another developer, I'm forgetting who, kind of ported that over to the US for the NES, and it was actually a worse version. So if anyone ever wants to go back and play the original, they actually, in the collected the HD collection they did for PS3, they included the originals, the better version. So you can go back and actually play that today pretty easily. I replayed that a few years ago with Noisy, with Alex Noisy.
Cool.
Yeah, so Kojima, kind of not much needs to be said, I think, about him as a developer, especially if you're listening to this podcast. But this particular game took quite a while to come out and Metal Gear, the first one, had a sequel, Metal Gear 2, that was out there as well, but not quite as good as the first one. But between that game and then going to 3D, this game took quite a while. But it was a PlayStation 1 game. They did make it, but it was late, as I recall, in the life cycle. 1998, September 3rd. And as Brett was pointing out in pre-show, we've talked about 98 before a little bit, here and there. And it's one of my favorite years, I would say. Things like StarCraft came out, Half-Life 1 came out, Fallout 2, Ocarina of Time you mentioned, right?
Yep, yes, yes indeed. Banjo-Kazooie, another platform title at the time.
Rogue Squadron,
64.
Thief. So a lot of really good games, a lot of games that really are close to my heart. And of course, Rainbow Six came out that year. Oh, that's right.
Oh.
The first Rainbow Six, yeah.
And another really important debut as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was an interesting...
No, I mean, there's one that you haven't mentioned.
Oh, I thought you meant Rainbow Six. Spyro?
Spyro, sure. No, but I meant it was my first year in the industry.
Oh, yes. Okay, that debut, of course. Can't forget that one.
It is now 20 years and 18 days since my first day of work.
Oh, congratulations. You made it.
I did. Sort of.
Yeah, right. Sort of mixed, happy. Oh, Final Fantasy Tactics as well.
Just tired all the time. No, it was a great year for games, for sure. And when I was on that Kotaku Split Screen podcast, Kirk interviewed me and was asking specifically about that year, and then 2004, which was the year I left LucasArts at the very end of 2004. I was about 10 days shy of 7 years there, and that was another really good year.
Was also really well known. Wasn't that Half-Life 2? Ironically,
yes, I believe so. It would have been very near the end of the year, but yes, I can't remember exactly when. I didn't play it.
Actually, that might have been early. That might have been 2002. Actually,
it might. I don't recall. I feel like they were launching right around then. Anyway, neither here nor there.
Got a lot of good stuff. And I think so. So we're going to have a lot to unpack with this game, and when we definitely won't hit it all in the first episode. It's a short enough game. We'll probably try to do this into 3 episodes, but we'll announce the next section at the end. And Kojima's always been pretty public about his influences for the series in general, but you can really see them quite easily in the first game. You have the Kurt Russell, Snake Plissken. You mentioned Die Hard to some degree, and really what we know about Kojima specifically, especially back in this era, but to some degree he still does this quite heavily today. He's very influenced by film and TV, especially American stuff, and in the 80s. And for those who may remember, the cover of the original Metal Gear was basically a complete ripoff of a famous image of Michael Biehn from Terminator. And they just changed the art just enough so they couldn't get sued, as far as I could tell. But It basically was a shot from that, and Terminator was a big influence there for that character, at least. Michael Bihn's character, I forget his name in the movie, but yeah. And then this one, it's got a very
Kyle Reese, is that right?
Of course. How did I forget that? Yeah, good. It's got a very, very big theme on espionage, right? And a little pulpy and melodramatic, as he likes to get in his stuff, and we'll talk a lot about that as we go.
A little bit,
yeah. I'm understating it, of course.
The longer you go, I think the more crazy and melodramatic it gets. In this,
the shackles come off over the years,
for sure,
as he gains notoriety. But very cinematic. I think we'll talk a lot about that, I'm sure. And then, of course, the main reason we're playing this one is because it's committed wholeheartedly to the stealth genre. I'd forgotten The Thief came out the same year, which is another great. I'd heard some early stories about that from Randy Smith back in the old days about Thieves, the genesis of that. And we talked about that a little bit with Ken Levine when he was on too.
Yes.
And, the concept of devoting a whole game design around stealth was not very common, especially in 3D, and there was some in 2D, but it was a difficult thing to do. And even the original Metal Gear had stealth, of course, but it was, it was 2D, 16 and 8-bit. So, but this, I remember the mini story I'll tell up front, because this is actually the game that basically I didn't have a PlayStation 1 at the time. I was a latecomer to that platform. And when I saw this demo, I think it was in like they had a famous demo disc that came out for the first section of the game, and it had the opening cinematic and all of that stuff, and just blew our minds. Yes. And I went out and bought one that day because of this game. So
I did not run out and play it that day. As I mentioned last time, I got a chance to play it in the office, I believe. Someone brought in a PlayStation or had one lying around, and I gave it a go. I got as far as Ocelot, so basically the section we played here, and then I was done. I didn't want to play anymore because I complained that it was straight into this boss battle, and I was like, I really prefer systemic games, and this isn't really kind of my thing. And I assume it was Darren. It's in my memory it was Darren who said, oh, well, if you don't like boss battles, you're probably not going to like this game very much. And so I never went back and picked it up. I feel like I may have gone a bit further. I might have gotten to the sniper section and just couldn't get past it. Mm-hmm. And of course, I hadn't had a console at that point before in my life. In fact, I still hadn't until the PS2 came out. So my switch over to being a console gamer is pretty much complete these days. And that's largely because I I program all day, and I don't want to have my hands on a keyboard when the evening comes. But at the time, that was a new experience to me, holding controller in my hand. I had played a bit of PlayStation cute. Here and there. Yeah, it was, it had been a long time since, I guess the Atari maybe was the one I played. I played some Sega a little bit in college, but mostly I played PC games or computer games of different kinds. So this was one of those games, and I played some Nintendo 64 in the office as well. So it wasn't like I hadn't held a controller. It just was more unusual for me, and then I was more comfortable with the keyboard. So the big stealth game for me this year was Thief, for sure. I can remember that one. When the demo came out for that, I was playing it in the office, totally intent, and my office, my desk even faced the door, if you remember. Mm-hmm. But Darren came into my office and walked into the office. I didn't notice he was there. He went around behind me and grabbed me on the shoulders while I was playing that game. So he stealthed me playing Thief. Anyway, enough of that. Enough of my backstory.
Well, we definitely should. I mean, the interesting thing about this game being on the PlayStation, because of course Final Fantasy VII was one of the biggest games on that original console. And of course, the other example I was going to bring up, just because it's always a little top of mind for me, was Tomb Raider, which was 96. And their cinematics were all CGI, of course. So they did a little bit of in-engine stuff, but they didn't really focus on that. And I think one of the things that I remember, though, and it's interesting that we just played Anachronox because it was such a cinematic game and also all in engine. Mm-hmm. The thing I remember about this was that I think was starting to blow our minds because we were all playing it. We were all game developers at the time, so we were comparing notes and all of that stuff. And of course, LucasArts had the capacity to do CGI stuff, so we would always try to when we could. But just the care and attention being put into, and as just like you, I tended to be and still am much more of a systemic gamer. Those are the kinds of games that I gravitate to. I'm not actually a huge linear game fan when it comes down to it if I have a choice. But as we'll talk about over the series, for whatever reason, this franchise has pushed all my buttons, and it's just such a weird franchise that I'm kind of intrigued by it, and I feel like I can see through the silliness of it, and I kind of enjoy that it goes so silly. I don't take any of it seriously.
I mean, you don't strike me as a John Carpenter era action movie fan, though.
Well,
or a Carpenter fan, really. I
was as a kid. I mean, I was when they came out. Yeah. Okay. And James Cameron stuff.
Because this is also set in an Alaskan base, so it makes me reminds me a bit of The Thing as well. Even of course, there's no horror element or anything like that. It's just that remote setting is also kind of a big part of it.
Yeah. One of the notes I wrote down was music related, and Carpenter is who I referenced. Good
composer reference, because his sort of. Oh, I don't know.
It's a weird minimalistic.
I was gonna say sort of percussive and synthy. Yeah, synthy was the other thing I was reaching for, because he wrote a lot of the music for his films.
Yeah,
and it's terrific music, and it holds up really well. Believe it or not, I think it's often spoofed, but and sort of is here in a way, but or more, maybe just given homage, I think maybe is a better term for what's going on here, since so much of this is lovingly referring to movies that he loves, for sure. But yeah, let's dig into the cinematics. I think if there's anything we're going to take away right off the bat, you can tell it's from the very beginning. It's all very cinematic, and what I was really impressed by was how willing he was to move the camera constantly, cut across somebody in a position to make everything more dynamic. when characters themselves wouldn't be moving very much. When I contrast that with having just playing Anachronox, where so often the camera is more or less static and we're watching a ship fly by and things like that. There are times when we're in chase cameras and things like that, but here it's pans, it's dolly ins, it's zooms. There's some quick cuts, sometimes often for humorous effect. There's slow-mo. There's a million different cinematic techniques that are going on in order to tell his story, and they're totally intercut in the middle of gameplay. There's no visual indication that you're going to get a cutscene. They just happen. Yeah,
usually it's some sort of slight transition to an entrance or a doorway or something like that. But yeah, it's a stream of it's all a stream of content, really. And I don't know if that. I mean, do you think there's any element of? Well, I was going to ask if there's any element of the technical side of it to why they wanted them to be all in engine. Of course, the amount that they're doing wouldn't have been possible at this time to do in CGI because they have so much, you know what I mean? And to render all of those out. So doing it in real time gave them much more flexibility, say versus Final Fantasy, which had, enormously elaborate CGI cinematics, right? And cutscenes throughout that game.
Well, I can think of a couple reasons. I mean, one is typically in order to render video on the fly, you need to be basically streaming as uncompressed as you can frames off disk throughout it, and that expands both the number of disks you need because, of course, we're on CDs here, and so we're at, I think in this era, 660 megabytes, which is not a lot. Video will eat that up very, very quickly, even at lower res. So there's that. Then the separate issue, I think, is that typically that also means you have to basically eject all your other data out of memory. So because there's only 2 megabytes of data on the PlayStation 1, you're basically going to be throwing out anything else. And so you will have very distinct breaks that have to happen.
And loads
and loads, right, to be able to... It's pretty good at slamming stuff through. It does that pretty well. It's very, very good at streaming and streaming data in particular. But I think with the structure of the game where you are traversing areas back and forth, if there were video cuts there, it might be super frustrating. You feel like you're always waiting for something to load.
I'd be interested to know, what the initial motivation, because I was wanted to ask you that question because I kind of assumed that there were definitely going to be some streaming, limitations and such. But the other reason I think we've talked about from time to time in some of the other games we've played is there is something to be said for keeping a consistent, consistent feel to the whole game. And though you don't get the fidelity of like close-ups on faces and such if you do it in engine, and of course this was before hardware rendering, right? This is all software rendering. Yes. So you get everything's even more pixelated. Compared to, say, Anachronox, which we just played. And so you lose all that fidelity. But at least I was always definitely a big fan and would always fight for sort of that consistency when you can get it, right, where you have it in engine cinematics and it feels like going between gameplay and the cinematics is much more smooth and fluid, and you're not kind of jerked out of that experience, which to be honest, because I never finished Final Fantasy VII, but I did start it when it had come out, and some of that stuff always was jarring for me, at least. I really appreciated that. And I think to your point about the camera work, especially in this opening, and because it was part of the demo, like the amount of care and attention and effort that they put into, just the, when he's coming in on that underwater, torpedo vehicle thing, and even just like the water effects and the audio work and kind of all of the framing of that thing going underwater. And then I love spy stuff. Like that is one of my main buttons that this whole franchise pushes, it's like the most badass covert spy stuff. Right. And then he kind of, he has his frogman suit on when he gets out of the water, and his respirator, and then the lighting was the other thing I wanted to mention, right?
I'm not finished with camera yet. The other reason why I think there's a lot of benefit here is that, of course, in engine you get a huge production benefit. It has some costs, right? Because you have to build systems to be able to move these cameras around and do the things that you want. But having made that investment, you can tweak the cameras until the day before you ship, which is not definitely at the time not true of rendering. So if you had a rendered out cutscene, if you want to change something about it, you're looking at re-rendering and potentially recompressing the whole thing. And at the time, that was beyond the reach of most game developers. It's something we wouldn't even today. I would say there's a huge cost to that. And here you could change a voice line, which would change the timing of your whole thing, and just be able to do it probably with some scripting, which is a really nice thing to be able to do. It's probably not scripted. It's probably streaming in some data just in order to keep the memory footprint low. But that said, I think you can probably get away with a lot longer in something like this.
Yeah, I'd love to know what kind of tools, if any, they had for their cinematics, because that is a very complicated thing to do in any game, and at this era, and with as much control as they seem to have, and also because some of my few people on my team are from Kojima, so they've told me some stories about sort of how meticulous he can be, and allowing him to have the control that you're talking about up, and just kind of tweaking and tuning and tweaking and tuning. I'm not surprised that kind of became his MO, for the rest of the series. And he really hasn't done, I can't think of any CGI, really anything since then. It's all been an engine. He's done some FMV,
right,
in some weird stuff in 4, but other than that,
and there's some here in the intro, the attract mode.
Oh yeah. So, but
and there's another place too where they're discussing the development of the Metal Gear, which we'll get to. But when you meet the guy who's all tied up with Revolver.
Yeah, you mean when they do some found footage kind of stuff?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That's all FMV.
Yeah. No, I just meant like rendering out characters in CG and stuff.
Right. Yeah, no, he doesn't. I don't think he does that ever, really.
Yeah, and it's a blessing and a curse from a development standpoint because just because you can tweak something till the last minute doesn't always mean you should, I guess I'll say, and it's great to have that control, but you can kind of overdo it sometimes too. But the games are, it makes an impact, high quality. But I think the interesting thing, I don't know. I mean, you can jump in if you have some topics you want to hit. But
no, that's fine. You were going to go to lighting, which I think is worth talking about too.
Yeah, and then I think when it comes to setting, I guess I'd say the mood and the art direction for the game, which I also remember being when I back then when I had played it that first time, remember being really impressed by, because a little bit like Tomb Raider, which was also software rendered on this console. There was a consistency of art direction that was really in trying to go after some of that, as real as you can get for that era. A consistency of art direction that was really admirable. And I remember with this game specifically, even just the texture work and just like I said, the lighting and the consistency of the art direction. You're in this military base in Alaska. It's everything's very cohesive. It's got a really, really consistent color palette, and again presses kind of all those buttons for me of that kind of espionage, kind of Cold War. Like he's obsessed for this franchise, at least, obsessed with the Cold War politics of things, which we'll get to later, I'm sure. But yeah, the lighting definitely, helps sell that whole opening area.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you get up to where the hind is, they've got a hind.
Mm-hmm. The very Russian theme, right? And that was like which Schwarzenegger 80s movie was the Hind in? Was it a Schwarzenegger one? Was that Commando maybe? No.
Commando, I think, would probably
I don't know if it had a hind. Anyway, hinds were like a thing,
I don't remember a hind,
right?
No. Well, and then, of course, in Predator, you've got, get to the chopper!
Yeah. But I mean, hinds and Cold War, you know what I mean? It's like the Russians have the coolest helicopter, you know, and they're quote unquote our nemesis, you know, so. But I mean, I guess unless you have some more thoughts on the cutscenes, I wanted to transition a little bit into gameplay.
Yeah, no, let's go.
And then, you know, because of the cinematics being an engine, they can really more seamlessly, you know, transition into gameplay. And so you never feel like you're pulled out of it. And once he gets out of the water, you know, you transition into that gameplay camera. And the one thing I wanted to mention there, and why I mentioned the original game up front being a, you know, top-down 2D game, one of the, I'd say, controversies over the franchise's history has been its camera in the 3D games. And he's definitely evolved over time, and he/they have tried to change with the times, and they finally got there on the fifth one, or really, you know, however many that actually is. It's not really five.
It's way more than 5.
Yeah, counting Peace Walker and all the. But then they also would do iterations on them. But this one was also a little jarring, I think, for people, especially because Tomb Raider had been a game, and you know, we already played Mario and stuff like that. 3D third-person games, this one had a static, essentially isometric top-down camera for most of the stealth sections. And I remember it being a bit controversial because people were, you know, having trouble kind of making that transition, and myself included, in fact. It actually took me a long time. I didn't finish the game very quickly. It took me a long time to get through it back in the old days. And like, I think I had put it down just like you had and bounced off of it due to some of the camera stuff and the difficulty, and then picked it up years later. But that particular camera, I think, is really intriguing because I feel like the legacy of that, for me in my head, though we may never know for sure, I guess, unless we ask him, was coming from the original games, you know, where it was very much the sense of awareness. You needed to have an idea of your surroundings, I guess, and is the design motivation, I guess I'd say, you know, where you can see more of the world and where Snake is in relation to the world.
Right.
And that seemed like a very intentional choice that he, you know, committed to.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you have the map, so you kind of have that and it's interesting that it doesn't become a map game, even though you have a map. We can maybe go into that at some point, but there's this sense where I'm moving around in the 3D environment, but I'm kind of checking up into that 2D view. Top-down view, just to reinforce that I know where things are and what I'm getting myself into, so I can think about it a little bit more. And plan, I guess. But it doesn't feel like it's necessary to be in the view that it is, although it does feel like that makes that map naturally fit to what you're doing. If you were in sort of a third person over the shoulder, it might be a lot harder. You'd also have to have a view, basically, or a direction for Snake himself. You'd have to have maybe an arrow or something like that, and there's just an extra step at that point to understand what your position is in the world and what you're seeing, and how, if you were seeing something from first person or a closer third person, it might be difficult, or they might have felt it would be difficult for players to make that mapping naturally in their head between that and sort of the tactical view in the upper right. So
yeah,
it's a theory.
I think it's a good theory. If you go into first person view in this game, Snake's view frustum does show up on the map. I don't know if you noticed.
Oh, that's
that.
right. Yes,
yeah,
that's
so
right.
you can see which way he's looking. And to your point, and it's an excellent point, that the camera design must go with the level design and vice versa. You know, so to your point, so once they decided the camera that they had. The level design is going to come from that, right? Sort of the lines of sight and all of that stuff is going to be dictated then. And we'll probably I'm going to dabble into it. I don't think I'll play them all again, but we might bring up the VR missions later, which is something that's in the menu that you can do optionally. And I believe the story goes that the VR missions was basically some of their prototyping they did that they polished up, and that's sort of like proving out the camera design essentially in a very simplistic space. So there might be something to talk about there later, but yeah, I just wanted the camera specifically and the point of view is something that's really interesting about this first game. And to your point, was it a required way to do it? I mean, over the course of the franchise, clearly it wasn't, right? Because they find other ways to achieve the same gameplay. And some might say better versions of the gameplay, later on. And as we talked about, Thief coming out this year, was a perfectly great first-person stealth game with no radar. Had no radar or anything, right? It was all...
No, correct. They did have a light meter.
Had a light meter, but it was all based on... good level design and enemy placement and pathing, and so in the same year you had proof that, there are different ways to do it. But he committed to it in this game, and it was always intriguing to me that was a choice. And I thought it was always kind of in my head coming from sort of some of their design, maybe mentality from the previous 2D games. But that just
I do think it reinforces the name on the tin, which is tactical and espionage action or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pulling above like that, I think, makes it feel naturally tactical and not purely reactive in a way that I think first person and third person closer cameras often do. They feel more immediate and immediately therefore remove some of that tactical aspect. So it might also have been part of it. It might have been just the way he viewed the world or the sort of experience he wanted to have. So
yeah, that's a good catch.
Those all reinforce one another.
Yeah, and I guess the other kind of category of topics, moving into gameplay some more that I wanted to hit, that I think, I don't remember the order that I played Thief in this one. I must have played Thief first, though. What was
I definitely played Thief
No,
first.
yeah, it sounds like you did, but I'm trying to look. Let's see, when did Thief come out that year? Looking at the list,
I want to say it was around.
It came out after, so yeah, it was
around October. But
it was about a month. Yeah, November 30th was when.
Oh, November. Okay.
Thief came out. So I don't remember the order, but the other thing that this game and Thief both did for me, because I think I mentioned on the podcast before, I think the stealth genre is one of my favorite genres of any game genre, and these are the first games I remember playing, especially in obviously 3D, that fully committed to that concept. You were a vulnerable character. You weren't great, and in fact, the combat in this game is not great at all. Right. And where the primary button is crouch and crawl versus a jump or fire or something like that. And so the way that they prioritize buttons is always a good indication of kind of where their focus is. And, the first thing
the primary button is technically, I think, the circle button in this game.
Yes, because of the Japanese mapping.
Because of the Japanese, right?
Yeah.
But the X is the crouch, right? Am I forgetting that? Am I getting that
X
right?
is the crouch, yeah, and then action is the circle, yeah.
Oh, right, action, okay, yeah.
Yeah, you're circle in my head. Circle.
Circle's right, yeah.
Square is fire, yeah.
If you've got a weapon equipped,
if you got a weapon, yeah. So, but just like as soon as you start that first room, they teach you to crawl and duck and crawl, and you're kind of going through things.
Right. That's true. It's the first thing you do.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of point out that commitment to stealth was something that was in its early stages. When you have, say, again, bringing up Tomb Raider as another, and Mario or what have you, but Tomb Raider being kind of a more simulating, semi-real experiences with somebody who is doing no stealthing. It's all about jumping and firing and acrobatics. So that was an interesting aspect.
Choice is a really good one too, from the standpoint of reinforcing that you're in 3D now, and in fact using it to do some really nice camera work. There's a little bit of Dutch angle on that as you're crawling underneath there, and you can see the white suited soldier, I guess, patrolling, and he's framed really, really nicely as you kind of emerge out from under that. It's a really nice little scene, sort of indicating you could feel like maybe they thought about the first person as a game. But they at least want to make you feel like you are close to this character. And so whenever you're crawling, you're basically in his head. You've got your eyes are where his eyes in theory would be.
And it ups the tension, right? And
yeah, exactly.
Feeling that you're sneaking around, and then the radar goes away. And so you feel kind of claustrophobic, and you feel like you're sneaking, you feel like you're, I guess spies crawl around in ducts and stuff,
Yes.
So it's a really important part of the job, which is so funny because as the franchise goes on, like Snake is a badass, right? Like he's doing all sorts of things, but generally he, will spend a lot of time crawling into ducts, so.
Well, it's because there's one of him and there's hundreds of them. So
yeah,
you just go kill them all.
Yeah, that's
right.
fair.
Genome soldiers. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
But I just want to kind of point that out from the genre's perspective. There really wasn't, there weren't too many games focused on just highly prioritizing what stealth gameplay is going to be, and deprioritizing that concept of fantasy fulfillment of like the action hero, that's doing crazy
and in fact
stuff.
going to the point of basically making combat not a very good option.
Right. High lethality.
And that's a real risk at this time. Someone commented on the stream, and I can't remember who it was. Might have been Moss, but how when he first played it, he didn't know you were supposed to be stealthy, and he just kept killing everybody. Right. It was a very difficult game because there was always more enemies, and there's not tons of ammo, so you end up having to use the close quarters combat. And it took a while to get into the groove of realizing, I'm not supposed to let them see me, which is it's a risk, right? It's definitely, I think with Thief, right, that you're meant to be in the shadows and all that. I mean, it's right there in the name, but here it's not as clear because you don't necessarily think of spies as necessarily being only stealthy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, especially when like Snake Plissken and other influences that he had, were not about that either.
Right.
It was about Uzis, and I mean the 80s in general were not about sneaking.
Sure. Right. Yeah, that's very true.
The 80s were about gunfire and talk about melodrama.
Yeah.
It's a good point. The lethality alone that needs to come for a stealth design to work is very off-putting to people, and I think that's another reason why a lot of people put this game down when it came out, because they were used to playing.
I died 3 times in the boat in the water hangar there, so I got
this time. Yeah,
this time on stream.
Yeah,
like, oh boy, this is going to be a long night.
Well, they had. Yeah, I only died once, but I had mistakenly stepped in the puddle that's there that actually has reflection in it. Did you see that puddle there? Or there's a few of them, but
yes, right.
Makes noise and kind of is a nice segue to just sort of the audio. The game design for audio in this game is also interesting, right? Because in a stealth game, how much noise you makes a difference, and the radius you are to the enemies and such, and what direction they're facing. And then in the next section, the footprints in the snow can alert them.
Right. That's where I was going to go. Is there's multiple ways, in fact, that they can figure out that you're there, or that somebody who shouldn't be there is there.
Yeah. And that was just mind blowing to me at the time. I just loved those little.
And if you were to knock somebody out, I'm pretty sure they can find the guys and wake them up. Right. I'm pretty sure I remember that. Although I haven't had that happen yet. So there's a number of things that are going on where the enemies while they are fairly simple in their general design, and their functional design is basically patrol this path, and just play this animation, this cycling walk and whatever, and maybe turn and face this direction, whatever. But it's basically all just patrols and timing and finding your windows through those things to move about. But the fact that they can react to different things that might happen gives it sort of this feel of sudden improvisation of, oh man, because of course that evasion light comes up, or warning light, the red. I forget what the stages are, but there's the alert, and then the evasion, right, is the yellow.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
so they see you, and then you can run around because you don't want to engage them if you can avoid it. But unless you can find a place where they can't see you and can't navigate to you, they're likely to track you down. And at that point, it's just waiting for somebody to call and yell your name. So.
Yeah, I mean that whole alert system is another thing that, kind of this genre needs some form of, right? Because of the high lethality once you alert the enemies. And Thief had kind of had a similar thing. I remember kind of a similar reaction to some people who were, PC first person shooter players, of, really wanting to take your sword out and going toe to toe once they find you, you know, and that was not a swordplay game.
No, it was not.
you were not going to succeed, most likely. But there were the stubborn ones that thought that they could do it. But it punishes you by killing you and such. But yeah, with this alert one, it gives you that at least a loop where you have a soft fail, right? You can get spotted and then recover, hopefully. And each of the Metal Gear games does, better or worse jobs at that, in my opinion. But this one's
and you can usually recover if you can get to a doorway and go through a level load, basically.
Yeah, or crawl. Yeah, try to find a duct before they see you.
Right, or something you can crawl under. Yeah.
Yeah, you can cheese it a little bit too. Yeah, and just kind of get the level load.
I did that an awful lot. Not so much with this game, because I don't think I caught on to that. But when I played Metal Gear Solid 2. The one with what's his name, Raiden?
Yeah, Raiden.
There's it's way more easy to do that sort of thing. It's just run into an area. Oh, they saw me. Run back out, or run out the direction you wanted to go. And once I realized that, the game became a lot simpler.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you find that stuff through necessity for sure. So I mean, one thing I did want to mention, and I was going to mention this up front, but I kind of wanted to clear the air on, and not to get too serious of a note though, but though I love this franchise and I think I always will, and it's, like I said, it's pushed all my buttons. One topic that I've always disliked with the way that he's handled it is it's sexism. I just wanted to make sure it was said, spoken on air. It's really don't approve. He's really generally handled it poorly in every game, with a few exceptions, and it's too bad because it's for me it's one of the harder parts to play when I play the games. I like all the mechanics and the systems, and I'm a very patient gamer, and I generally like to play games that give me the ability to not kill enemies. So that's why I think I like the stealth genre. But it pains me sometimes. Of course, I'm alluding to some of the things that some of the dialogue that Snake uses, and the way that women are handled so far in the section we played, and not cool. So anyway,
no, that's a good point. I mean, certainly there's the focal point of Meryl's behind. Which is just like, come on. And
some
also
of the codec
banter.
Stuff.
I was going to say some of the banter with particularly Naomi, and as I think it gets more so with Mei Ling as time goes on. I can't really remember. It's not good. It's not the thing you really want to borrow from 80s action movies, to be honest.
Right.
If you're taking from them, because those are also very testosterone laden and sexist. It's always the women who are in peril. Very rarely are they strong characters, or even more than refrigerator characters, right? So it's it's kind of a mess. At least in this case, the female characters are competent and have jobs to do, but the tone is still caveman. So it's kind of a mess as far as that goes. I can see strengths and weaknesses, but the weaknesses are pretty dire.
Yeah, and it goes. It's it goes all the way up to Metal Gear 5, unfortunately. He didn't really learn.
We'll regret our words and deeds, I think is what he said.
Oh, was that a quote from him?
Yes, that's what he said about when we learned why Quiet had the outfit she did or something. We would regret our words and deeds. I think is what he was saying. I think that's what he said.
What a character, oh man!
I maybe forget. Yeah, quite a character.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway,
let's touch on some of the sort of the story elements, because one of the things that I really am impressed by, once you've sort of gotten, they don't go too deep on the story. There's right at the beginning, you have this nice setup. There is also the attract mode, which kind of is setting up your mission briefing, basically. And then you're in there and you're doing stealth and getting in. And then you have a little bit of the radio, which is basically, we're in Alaska and there's a hind and they're going to send the hind off and it kills the F-16s and all that. You get all that stuff. That's kind of happening off screen. So it's not, I mean, the hind is there, but then it's gone. The big parts are where you run into, and I'm going to constantly refer to you for names, but when you run into the two men who had the passwords, one's
DARPA chief. I didn't write his name down. It's not coming to me.
The DARPA chief and the other guy.
Yeah, the other guy is. His name is not coming to me either. It was just on the tip of my tongue. It's the name of another character that I feel like he stole, but it'll come to me. But yeah, these. First of all, one of your targets is a DARPA chief, and like in the video game world, these, you know what I mean? Like, it's just such a weird context for a character, you know what I mean? Or
yes.
for a hostage.
It reminds me though of 80s action movies, because of course Snake Plissken's not going after just any schmo. He's going after the president and Escape from New York. But also just generally, I feel like if you watch Japanese or Hong Kong or Korean movies that are sort of set in the same sort of milieu, like even a Jackie Chan movie, for example, might have somebody really important that's been kidnapped or whatever. It's often kind of strange that way. So where you're talking on the phone via video conferencing with somebody way high up in the chain of command, and they just kind of are part of it. It makes it seem more important, I guess. It certainly seems more important, but I don't know. It's just it is kind of funny that way.
And the reason I bring that up is I think for, again, one of those buttons for me is that Cold War era, spy political intrigue and espionage. I don't know why I love it so much. I think it's something my dad kind of got me into. And I was tickled to be going and rescuing the DARPA chief. You know, I mean, I was like, that's great, and
Donald
just
Anderson.
Arms dealing and all this stuff. What's that?
Donald Anderson.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, because they don't mention his name very often. And then the other guy, do you remember? I'm looking for his name. He had a memorable name because Baker, right?
Yeah, Baker. It's Baker, yeah.
His first, like Russell Baker or something, or Robert Baker. Anyway, yeah. But I mean, you're right that the story itself is pretty simple at this point. But as you mentioned before, when you do get to Baker, that's when you start seeing the real Metal Gear crazy start happening, because they start talking about the arms. The arms dealership, the arms deal, kind of, the different military industrial complex sort of stuff going on with the different companies.
Right. and also how because there's been an extended peace, basically the military is spending less, right? And so these companies basically want war in order to fluff up their budgets.
Nuclear politics and geopolitical stuff and just like, I think, and I'm kind of, I don't obviously remember this, but I feel like in my heart when I'm, when that particular set of cinematics started playing, it's just, for me, I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm in. This is crazy. Right, what are they talking about? Why are they talking about? And then, as you pointed out, they started playing found footage of like, nuclear missiles firing, and it's actual FMV from like news footage or something. And you're just like, what is going on? How are these two having this conversation in the middle of this base?
Right.
And it's just so wacky and unlike, any other game with a goal to go rescue a hostage,
It's also particularly strange because there is that, like, why would he do that? Why would anybody explain all this stuff? Like, get me out of here. You're here to rescue me. Rescue me. Get me out of here, soldier. It's really funny the way it just starts to lay that stuff right out, like as you meet these characters and have various reversals, right? Of course, the first time you meet, I guess it's Baker is the first one you meet, and he has that heart attack.
Oh, Anderson's the first one. Yeah, Baker's the second one.
Oh, and you meet Anderson, and he has a heart attack, and you're like, what's going on? What are you doing? And then of course, and there'll be a big surprise with that later, I guess. No spoilers. People can play along, and they'll get there.
Can't wait.
Had you forgotten that?
No, I can't wait to get there. And for anyone who's never played this and is playing with us, I can't wait for them to get there. I'd be interested to know if anyone listening is playing along and hasn't played it.
I know of one. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we had an email. So.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Because it's just I would love to relive this game for the first time again. She's just so crazy. And I mean, there's that sort of foreshadowing that happens, but to your point about like just the exposition that's happening there, that was another divisive part of that is this franchise, right, for people,
Sure.
And so the joke is, oh, Metal Gear, I hate Metal Gear, or I love Metal Gear. That's the one with all the cutscenes,
Right, the movies.
I play for 30 seconds and then another cutscene plays,
right.
And I get it. I totally get it. Like I said, I don't know what it is about this franchise, but I'm generally not a fan of that either. But these are just so wacky and so self-serious or something,
right?
That I'm just like, okay, dude.
No, they take the melodrama seriously, even when it's tongue in cheek. At the same time, it really threads this higher wire act of like not being too serious that you can't enjoy yourself and
it's
and at the same time, and I think that's again maybe a cultural thing, but then at the same time to be so dramatic, and to also just take the drama really seriously. So you can have a moment where this guy's just had a heart attack on you, and then you're able to get out, and there's a guard who's been trussed up and left naked, and even has a sensor blurred out butt. Which is particularly funny.
And then if you never saw that coming, you'd be like, "What is going on?"
Exactly.
Especially this day and age.
Well, and before I stepped out of the door, I noticed, because the blur effect actually is it's through the walls. It's you can see it wherever you are. Sorting. So if you go back, you go into the cell, you can notice it there if you're in first person view. Because I went up to the door and was trying to peek out and see what was going on, right? I couldn't remember if you could do that. So I was at first person in the door, and I'm looking around, and then I can see this like flickering pixels over to the left of that is actually that thing seen through there. Because why would you, at this time, you wouldn't want to spend the money to try to figure out if you could see it from every direction. You just render it no matter what, because it was a throwaway and expensive effect, probably to some extent.
Yeah, and then and then basically, we have to go blow by blow, but to kind of tie up this section that we played, we get to the armory section. I wanted to point out a little touch in design that I really appreciated in that section, where you have to C4 some walls that have been recently
Yes.
Cemented up. And they haven't really explicitly taught you that when you put your back against a wall, the camera will change view. In many cases, you can see around the corner, which is another great, stealthy touch. But also, you can tap the wall to distract a guard and bring them to you. And they actually tell you, if you want to find these walls, even though they look different, you can also tap on them and they'll sound different.
They'll sound hollow. Yeah.
It's integrating this concept of this tapping on the wall that you probably haven't done up to this point. But it very effortlessly teaches you can do it, and they don't make a big deal out of it. Of like, oh, you should tap the wall to distract an enemy or something,
Right.
Which I always appreciated. Just a little tidbit there where, they married two different concepts together in a very elegant way.
There's also a nice little bit of level design I pointed out on the stream where so I made a mistake at one point and put the C4 down in a place where there wasn't a wall.
Oh, I did too. Yeah.
Because there are spots where it just looks old and rotten or something like that, and I just misread it. And so then I found the place. So I only had one left by the time I got into the hallway, where there's a choice either to go basically north, which is where you're actually supposed to go, or east. And I went east, and then you've got these two gun turrets in there, which you can take out with a chaff grenade, and then there's more C4, which I thought was really nice. It's like, oh, you made a mistake, but here it's okay. And of course, then I learned you can actually also go back and get more C4 from the other room as well. So
yeah, there's a couple more. Yeah,
which is what I did, because that's what I ended up using to take Ocelot down quite a bit. If you're very careful with where you put that, you can actually damage him without setting off all the rest of the trap.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that leads us to sort of the final moment for this section, and that was, our first boss with the legendary Revolver Ocelot. And I think the quick things to mention there for me are, the larger than life characters of the franchise. And especially the bosses, which we'll see consistently throughout this game. Again, like, I'm not taking any of this seriously. They're just wacky enough to where I'm intrigued by what is going on. I love this series. I'm going to keep playing because it's so crazy. But that does rub some people the wrong way because they're so melodramatic and silly.
Yeah, they are. But I mean, they have great. One of the things I really appreciate about this is as you meet new characters, you get their name. And maybe their rank, if there's an appropriate rank, like Secretary of Defense or whatever, Department of DARPA Chief. Excuse me.
Chief, yeah.
So you get that, and you'll get the actor as well, I believe.
Yeah. No, it's a voice actor. Yeah.
And what's funny, of course, is that the first time you get one of those is actually when you see at the end of sort of the opening section. You have Snake framed in the view, and it says directed by Hideo Kojima, which is really funny. He's so clearly like, oh, hey, this is my wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
But I do love how it'll pause basically with a nicely framed shot of this character you're meeting and say, so and so, voiced by such and such, right?
Yeah,
And it's a wonderful little touch. It's such a unique touch. It's not a thing you ever see.
No,
we did.
Yeah, we glossed over that in the beginning, though. But the credits integration into the gameplay was another kind of revelation, I'd say, for us when we played it. Yeah, and
well, I remember at LucasArts it being a thing where people were wondering, is it okay now for us to put ourselves forward more? In the way we present the games. And,
that's a good point. It was a bit of a sea change for the industry in that way. And people, I think,
absolutely,
people don't think about that. Yeah, and I mean, with the boss fight itself, a little underwhelming in its design, obviously, but you're kind of still learning things, and you're definitely learning how to shoot. And like Brett said, you could use a couple different tools there if you're careful. But a bit, I'm full disclosure. I'm playing on easy just for the podcast. I believe I've played it on the hardest difficulty in the past, but on easy, it's not too bad. On harder difficulties, this is a bit of a pain. Because
I died. Well, I didn't die so much as blow up the DARPA chief seven times. Yeah. Because I was trying to figure out how to place the C4 in such a way as I could get him without setting that off, and I kept setting it off in the wrong place. But I did my best. I did pretty well, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too complicated. They always add in some additional mechanics with their bosses because they're all pretty custom, and in this case he reloads and you can see how many bullets he has, and I think there's some cool little touches there, and just Revolver Ocelot is just a great character, and
character and a great name.
Yeah,
it's probably my favorite name of this whole series as well.
Yeah, I'll give you that. He's one. I think he's one of my favorite too. But we have a nice once you save him, we have a nice introduction to another important character. This we know is the Cyber Ninja so far, and he comes in, and there's a bunch more mystery and who is it, and he has some weird reactions as well. But he cuts off Revolver Ocelot's hand, and Ocelot gets away, and we'll see what happens after that. And then you're wondering who this Cyber Ninja guy is. But then that's when the whole big monologue on geopolitics happens that we talked about earlier. But the last thing I wanted to mention before we take a break is one of the other weird revelations for this game, and that's breaking the fourth wall. And what they say, what Baker reinforces in that monologue is that you need to contact Meryl, who's the woman that you met earlier, and her codec frequency is on the back of the CD case.
The
literal CD case.
And it literally says to you, look on the CD case.
Yeah. And you're like, what? What CD? What CD case? I don't have a CD in my inventory. What are you talking about? I don't have one. And you're like, wait a second. What, you mean the real CD case for the game? Yeah. And sure enough, it's there's a screenshot of her on the codec, talking to you on the back. It looks like a screenshot. You'd never know it was important, but it also shows her frequency, and that's where you get the frequency for her. So it's kind of a puzzle of breaking the fourth wall puzzle. And I think I mentioned
it's not the only one. There's also when you're in the ducts, there's and we'll have more later. But in the ducts, there's a moment where they tell you to look around using the triangle button.
Oh yeah. They're not afraid to do that kind of stuff too. Yeah, you're right.
They'll just throw it right in there when you need to know it. They'll tell you about.
But totally
stuff.
In character, right? They're like,
yes, in character.
Campbell is talking just as seriously as he does about what weapon you should use.
You'll want to look around with the triangle button.
And this was I actually haven't played this game since I got this. I think I've talked about it on the cast, but my phone case, my cover, actually has the CD has the frequency from the CD case on it. It's kind of a fan jokey thing, and I've never, because I haven't played the game since I got this phone case, so this is the first time since I've had this case where I can just look at my phone and get her frequency.
Nice.
So super
good. I mean, it's nerdy, but it's
nerdy. Yeah. So let's tie it up there. I think we have some emails to do.
We do.
We'll take a break.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. we are going to go straight into emails, and I believe I have the first one.
You do. It should be from Alan. Is that right? Alan
Yes,
Stevens?
Alan Stevens. Yeah, subject is Super Mario 64, and in parentheses it says overrated. One of the games that I started but never finished during the 64 era was Super Mario 64. However, with the recent release of Super Mario Odyssey and the recent playthrough on Dev Game Club, I decided to go back and finish the game that has been in my backlog since 1996. This was the only mainline Mario game that I hadn't finished until about a week ago. When firing up the N64 on New Year's Day, I found that my save file had 31 stars. Oh, good for you. That's a good head start. Given that I hadn't played the game in a couple decades, I decided to start fresh with a new save file. This also let me play along from the beginning with the podcast, which I saved from last year to coincide with my playthrough. I think I finished the game so quickly because I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. Well, I finished it with a bare minimum of 70 stars with red and blue but not green caps. 1 week after starting, I felt compelled to write to you about the game because I still hate this game. In full disclosure, I should mention that I rage quit this game after the 31 stars in 1996. I also wanted to quit this time, but I wasn't going to give up if Tim could persevere. Thank you, Alan. It was hard for me at times too. He's made clear that he's not great at platformers, whereas I had finished every other mainline game in the series. Listening to the podcast, I wasn't sure if he would make it, but he pulled it off. I had a similar late night experience in finishing the game. I'm not really sure why this game always seems to get free pass on its flaws. Many of its contemporaries are viewed more objectively today. I understand it in the context of the time, but the camera just wasn't up to the task in 1996, and that is even more obvious today. I think this game has a lot of great ideas, but the execution was just so frustrating. Zing. This might have been the best 3D platformer game of the generation, but I think that just means that the best 3D platformer of the time was meh. I know nostalgia factors in for a lot of people, but to me, Super Mario Sunshine seemed like a clearly better game despite the ugly opening cutscenes. I thought the water pack mechanic was a great way to fudge some of the limitations inherent in 3D platformers, and the controls and camera had been improved enough in Sunshine that the abstract levels with no pack were among my favorites despite the difficulty.
Yes, that was heavily edited down from Alan, who had also CC'd the Game Informer podcast. So there was a bunch of crosstalk between the two, and I tried to capture the spirit of the I hate this game and pull in all the Dev Game Club stuff that was specific to it. So I think it's unfair to judge Super Mario 64 against Sunshine, which is 6 years later, and which I remember having numerous places where I was more frustrated by the camera in Sunshine, to be honest. In particular, there's a structure that you go inside near the amusement park, and it's basically a sort of 2D jumping, but in 3D, of course, but it's all more or less in a plane, and the camera just cannot handle it at all. So I think they made similar. They were definitely writing checks that their camera couldn't cash as well in that game. I think from my standpoint, I would defend Super Mario 64 in its time. Absolutely, it's not going to hold up against a Super Mario Odyssey or Galaxy or what have you, games that came later, but that's because they built on it. So I don't know. I mean, I thought the camera was, for as much work as they had to do to invent it, and of course as developers we have a good sense of that. I feel like the game just stands apart for that because of what a step it was. But your thoughts?
Yeah, not too many to add. I will support Alan in that I had a lot of the same emotional thoughts that it seems like he had when he plays that game, and I am completely surprised that I finished it, to be honest. Legally finished it. You know, I had no means of, because I played on the OG, I had no means of cheating anyway. You
didn't use the cheat menu?
Oh no.
I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, that would have been son of a. But I think one of the points that he made that I've observed, and I think some people have really admitted to, that nostalgia does play a huge factor in this game for a lot of people who played it, when it came out. Because I've had a lot of people at work and friends who, who've said every time they go back to this game, it really didn't, definitely, the nostalgia clearly was a big part of it for them because it, shines a light on its flaws, but it's just its impact can't be argued. So, I think that's another big element, but yeah.
Its impact is certainly large. There are no other 3D Marios without that one. So somebody had to do all that work at some point. So
good for you for restarting and getting 70 though, Alan. I feel for you as well. So you had the next one?
Yeah, I have the next one. It's from our buddy Aaron Evers.
Yay!
He says, found it on the subject. Ever since the Tom Hall interview, which again was awesome, and holy mackerel, you got Tom Hall.
Yay!
I changed mackerel from something less family friendly there. I've been looking for Anachronox promo materials from back in the day to find anything related to the black and white world you mentioned. After combing through several scans of magazines and a few trips through the Wayback Machine, I found it! Planet Anachronox, thanks GameSpy, had some screenshots posted, but they also gave enough details on where the shots came from. Jake's 1999 game trailer. That would be Jake Hughes. After a little more digging, I found it on YouTube. God bless you, random uploader. There are a number of areas shown here that got cut from the game, so it was cool to see, even if it's low res. Maybe a few of those were Pal's World. I have the link, and I will put that in the show notes.
Cool.
Glad you remember that, and thanks for turning me into a crazy person for a few days. The truth is out there. I thought I was going to end up drawing spirals on everything and writing Red Rum on the walls. I'm replaying the game to see Rose and Pal's unique Demarcus levels and to dig deeper into the Elementor. If anything interesting comes from that, I'll give you guys an update. I've got all the bug piles up to sender mapped out so far. One last thing, in one of your streams, someone, maybe Moss, wondered about a speed run for the game, so I looked that up too. Turns out one person did a speed run of it in 2.5 hours, Mr. Ronald Railgun. Video link no longer works, but he wrote up a guide on how he did it. I have the link of that as well. Anyway, I just wanted to share the info. Thanks. Yes, I sent mail back to Aaron. There is clearly a shot that is set in Pal's World. It's sort of in this cylinder, and there are digitized. You can sort of tell a little bit of the cell shading that he was talking about, and then the black and white ones are pretty clearly. You can actually, if you know they're pirates, you can pick out a peg leg. And some other piratey appurtenances, like I think there's an eye patch as well. I think. So you can tell if you know what you're looking for, you can actually pick that out even at the low res. And I will say I blew it up to full screen so I can try to pick out more detail. There's not a lot of detail to be had between compression and the low resolution of this video, because at the time bandwidth was not there to support to support streaming video. So it probably looked great when they rendered it out, and not so great once they compressed the heck out of it. Anyway,
cool. Yeah, I forgot to ask. This jogs my memory. There was one question that I forgot to ask Tom that I'm kicking myself. I wanted to know who the heck that last enemy boss character was. What the deal with that character was? You know what I mean? That kind of Ganon looking,
right?
Ganondorf looking dude. Just it came out of nowhere. I couldn't figure out while I was playing who he was.
Yeah, we should email him. I'll do that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right, you take that last email, and then we'll talk about it next time. These, of course, have been sent to devgameclub@gmail.com, and we'd love to have them. So take it away.
Yes, Metal Gear Solid in 42 minutes from Phil Rosehill, who is our speedrunning correspondent usually. Gents, I'm actually going to try to play along on this one since I've never played this classic. Did you know there was a PC version of Metal Gear Solid? It's so broken that it can be finished in 40 minutes as seen at this month's Awesome Games Done Quick. The runner makes this quite entertaining, and there's a link.
Yes,
I did remember. Yeah, that's actually, I forgot about that, but there is a PC version. Yeah, but oof.
No kidding. No kidding. Oof.
Yeah, and I think they did a Twin Snakes version, right, which was a sort of a
GameCube.
remake with some changes on the GameCube. Yeah, and that would be, of course, hardware rendered as well. So you get sort of a, I think the PC one was built on that version potentially because it was also
no, it wasn't
hardware rendered. Oh, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. It was definitely, and they weren't the only ones to try this. There was also a PC version of Final Fantasy VII, I believe.
Yeah, no, and that's one I played actually some of. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But like I said,
the best way to play it.
No, that's maybe why I put it down.
Yeah.
IDOS published that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That was when they were starting up their relationship. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
well,
I bet that one goes pretty quick. The PC one, if it's that seems like it must be pretty broken.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they're exploiting.
I kind of what the breaks are. Sometimes performance is a big deal. Like if if the frame rate's really high, there are sometimes issues. We had that with Anachronox. I had issues. I had more animation issues till I managed to turn the frame rate down. So
yeah.
Anyway, so what are we going to play to next time?
Yes, we're going to try to get this done in 3 episodes. It's a deceptively short but can be frustratingly long game. So we're going to try to do it in 3. So the next step will be to get up to the first, finish the first Sniper Wolf boss battle, the first one.
Right.
And so stop after that.
The one in the snow.
Yeah, it should be the one in the snow, and then you'll know it, and then then we'll finish after that the next one. So
my memory of that battle is that I won accidentally. I didn't really understand how I managed to win that one when I played it a few years back.
Each boss battle, I think, is going to have a lot of fun stuff to talk about because they're all so unique and interesting, and that's. Probably my favorite Metal Gear, which is 3, that continues throughout the series.
That is my favorite Metal Gear, 3. Of the ones I've played. I have not played 4 and 5 yet, so.
Oh, man.
Or, excuse me, V.
Thank you very much. Good correction. Okay, so thanks for joining us. You can reach me at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end. Our podcast is, of course, at Dev Game Club on Twitter. Brett already mentioned the email, which is devgameclub@gmail.com. And Brett is
at Brett_Duville. And on Twitch, where I've been streaming the game, you can find me at twitch.tv/BrettDuville, _.
There you go. So then you can go and interact with him live and troll him.
It's much more fun to have people alongside me, and I'm looking down and I'm playing on the original hardware. Oh no, I'm playing on the PS2, which has a PS1 in it, and it's really fun to interact with listeners when I'm playing the game. So
this is probably
Saturday would be my guess. This coming Saturday, but look on the Twitter feed. I post when I'm about to go up on the Dev Game Club Twitter feed.
This is probably a fun one to play with people too, because you can mess up so wacky,
and I can do all my voices.
Oh yeah, great! I'll jump in there then and hear those wonderful performances. So there you have it. Until next week. Good night.
Good night.
What's wrong? Snake!
Sounds good. Oh, I've been wanting to say that.
Well done.